The prevailing myth of the London Blitz is one of unshakable unity. The Blitz spirit, a nation of tea drinkers smiling through the rubble. But that image, partially manufactured for American audiences in films like London Can Take It, obscures a more complicated psychological truth. And you know, that famous photo of St. Paul's Cathedral standing amidst smoke? Well, it was actually a composite of multiple images. When the air raid sirens sounded, the threat didn't just exist outside, it seeped through the keyholes. John Strachey, an air raid warden in London, described it as a domestic sort of war. It happened in kitchens, on landings, beside washing baskets. Civilians described the visual distortion of their reality. Ivy Hazelwood, a resident of Chelsea, wrote in her diary about how the searchlights outside transformed her bedroom. The orange glare of fires and the ghostly sweep of light turned her most private sanctuary into a stage set for a nightmare. It wasn't just visual. Survivors reported hallucinogenic levels of fear brought on by sleep deprivation and the constant vibration of 500-pound bombs. One observer noted seeing white shapes in a dark room only to realize it was just the sheets on the bed. The mind, under that specific type of sonic and psychological pressure, couldn't trust reality anymore. The government had actually predicted mass panic. Before the war, psychiatrists warned of a wave of neurosis that would require special psychiatric hospitals on the outskirts of cities. But that mass panic never came. What the authorities found was something far more complex than simple bravery. In cities like Hull, which was economically depressed and heavily bombed, researchers Bernal and Zuckerman found that while 53% of men showed no symptoms, a significant portion of the population, particularly women, developed moderate neuroses. They coped, but the stress had to go somewhere. Instead of hysteria, the body absorbed the trauma. There was a marked rise in psychosomatic illnesses, particularly peptic ulcers. If you couldn't show fear, your stomach would bleed for you. And then there were the refugia. In Ramsgate, thousands of people fled to the railway tunnels and simply refused to come out. They lived in squalid conditions underground, preferring that to the distorted reality of the surface. The authorities actually had to send in troops to clear them out, worried that their opting out was lowering morale for everyone else. The war ended, but the memory of that vulnerability, the knowledge that the sky could turn your kitchen into a target, did not. It became a cultural inheritance. By the 1950s, the threat had changed shape. It was no longer the drone of Heinkel bombers, but the silent, invisible spectre of fallout. The American government, unable to fund a massive public shelter system, switched tactics. They launched a campaign of what they called persuasive education, trying to convince individual households to build shelters in their basements and backyards. The rhetoric was, honestly, brutally effective on a psychological level. It combined the fear of instant death with the promise of survival, but only if you acted alone. One Wisconsin physician, between 1958 and 1962, collected government pamphlets, medical journal articles, and magazine clippings. He assembled them in a 3-ring binder, which he then stored in the shelter he had built in his yard. He was responding to what historian Carol Hollerswick calls preparedness rhetoric. He was not just stockpiling food, he was stockpiling information, trying to exert control over a world that now had the power to end itself in 30 minutes. But here is the overlooked consequence. He was one of the few who acted. Most Americans ignored the call. The ones who did prepare, who dug shelters and stacked canned goods, were often viewed with suspicion by their neighbors. Because if you build a shelter in your yard, you are sending a clear message. When the flash comes, my door is closed. The collective resilience of the Blitz, the crowded tube stations, the communal shelters, gave way to the isolated, individualistic survivalism of the Cold War. The threat had privatized. This is where the generational trauma lives on. It is not just about preppers watching the news today and buying freeze-dried food. It's about a specific kind of anxiety that's been passed down. Psychologists studying the legacy of totalitarian regimes and mass conflict note that the cultural memory of surviving these events influences the beliefs and behaviors of subsequent generations. If your grandparents learned that your bedroom could be a war zone, and your parents learned that your neighbors might become a threat to your survival in a nuclear winter, what do you learn? You learn that safety is, well, an illusion, and that preparation is an individual burden. The Blitz proved that civilian morale could hold. But it also proved that the human mind is not a concrete bunker. It bends, it distorts, and it passes those distortions down generation by generation until stocking a shelf with canned goods feels less like a hobby and more like a conversation with ghosts. The history of conflict isn't just in the treaties and the battle maps, it's in the way we lock our doors at night. It's in the reason you check the weather, or the news, or the battery in your smoke detector a little too often. If you want history that goes deeper than the myths, that looks at the human limits behind the headlines, subscribe to Warmer China and share this with someone who needs to understand why they prepare.